Hi, if you're just joining us for this webinar, we're just about to start today's session, which will be looking at an AP Manager's Guide to Automation, and in particular, scaling up automation in your organization. And while we let the others, everybody joining us, join the meeting, if you'd like to say hi and introduce yourself in the chat room, we can see where you are now, where you're joining us from, and perhaps what your organization is, just before we get started. We'll just take a few seconds. I think quite a lot of people are joining us, so we want to let them in so they don't miss anything from our experts. Okay. I think we're probably more or less there now. So let's get going. Welcome to this webinar. Now, you may have joined a previous webinar looking at getting started on automation. Today, we'll be looking more particularly at how you can scale up your automation program, and also looking at some new research, really new research carried out by IFOL. It's a 2022 report, and it's identified the very latest AP automation trends. And our experts on today's panel will also be discussing the key challenges of scaling up, whatever that means to you, and what to consider and include when you create your automation roadmap. If you're not a member or a student with us already, our IFOL Education Panel are our experts responsible for delivering virtual live masterclasses each month. We'll provide a best practice guide following this session, so no need to make any notes unless you really want to. And any questions you have, by all means, put them in the chat and we'll pick them up as soon as we can. And we'll also try and leave a little time at the end for a question and answer session if you have any when you've been through the whole thing. And we've also got a couple of polls, so when we put those up, please do vote in them. I'm Sue Beardsmore. I'm joined by Rob Israch, General Manager Europe and CMO for Tipalti, a company which is leading in automation software for accounts payable. He personally has over 20 years experience across international business, marketing and alliances. Formerly, he was with NetSuite, but for the past 7 years, he's helped grow Tipalti from 20 employees to over 700, and they have an $8 billion valuation. Deborah Richardson has also over 20 years experience in corporate finance with Fortune 500 companies in the US. She has a focus on accounts payable and has been involved in and led on many automation projects. She now runs her own consultancy. And Rod Chadwick, an accountant by training, but Rod's held senior roles for 25 years. He's also a former head of process improvement at the Royal Mail. No mean task. So all great experience there. Welcome to the panel. Let's get started. And first of all, we're going to look at a bit of context, perhaps. So why automate processes? So who wants to kick off on that one? Big question to start off with.
I can start on that one.
Thanks, Deborah.
Yeah, well, from the processing side, you definitely, especially in today's climate of the Great Recession, you want to make sure you're eliminating as many manual processes as possible. Because again, the Great Recession, you may have find it hard to retain and hire talent. And then I think a second reason is to make sure that you are including your entire P2P process and really see where you have not automated. So for example, you may have automated how suppliers send you invoices, but they can't submit invoices until they have a vendor record, and the vendor onboarding process is still manual. So you do want to make sure that you're looking at all of your manual processes and see where that automation can save you and your other team members time, processing time.
Sue, I think you might be on mute.
It's taking a long time. I'm sorry. It wasn't even just finger trouble. Sorry, guys. Rod, would you like to add to that?
Sure. Yeah. I think as well, it almost becomes a necessity. You know, you have performance targets, you have things that you want to achieve, and particularly for businesses growing and volumes are growing. There's always downward pressure on actually increasing the costs of the process. So you can go so far with trying to simplify and standardize and improve your processes, which will take you a good way, but you'll reach a point where you can't really go any further without automation. So it kind of becomes a necessity to hit the targets and expectations that you're aiming for. So it almost becomes self-evident. of the need to do it. But I think Deborah touched on an important point, which is not always obvious as well, about staff retention. A lot of the tasks that we're talking about are pretty tedious, when you're doing them day in, day out, and it's just keying stuff in manually in particular. And increasingly, that's not what people want to be doing in those roles. You've got a new generation of people coming through who are very capable, very savvy from the technology point of view, and need something a bit more interesting. So the way you create capacity to do something more interesting and more value adding is by automating those transactional elements of the process.
Okay, Rob, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I'll just build on exactly what Deborah and Rod said on, the retention side. And, finance is a function in addition to your talent, getting the most out of your talent, freeing them up to focus on making impact in the business, and as well as freeing up your future headcount, right? Future headcount of finance and across the business to focus on investment areas that actually help the business scale, help the business optimize and grow. And then finally, Rod alluded to it, but scaling processes and kind of institutionalizing best practice in a repeatable way, which becomes very important as you continue growing and growing up as a business.
Okay, we've already had somebody joining us in the chat. Abraham has said to all of you, she also sees automation as a risk management enabler. What's your view on that?
Yeah, totally agree. One of the great things about automation is that your risks and controls and your governance are hugely enhanced as a result of it, because that when you automate something and you do it correctly, it's going to be right first time every time. You put the validations in place, you put the automated processing in place, and it kind of takes care of that, and it provides an audit trail generally for everything that's done. So yeah, completely agree.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that too, because the user is the lowest link, or I want to say they're the greatest potential for risk, right? The user is. And so if you're still getting, invoices via email, vendor setup information, which can include some sensitive vendor data with the bank account and their tax ID or tax registration numbers. And so, you have to rely then on the user to know if that came from a cyber criminal or fraudster. And it's hard to stay 100% of the time to detect when you receive something that's fraudulent. And so automation takes that potential out of that potential for risk out of the user's hands.
Okay, Rob, anything to add?
I think that said it well enough, so I don't know if I can add too much more value there, but absolutely agree.
Thank you. Do you want to explore very briefly, before we go any further, automation doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to each person, does it? I mean, what do you mean by it?
Yeah, when we talk about automation at Tipalti, we tend to look at the entire accounts payable process from end to end. Deborah had mentioned vendor master record and supplier onboarding, supplier inquiry handling. We see that as a part of the process. Certainly error reduction, VAT information collection as well, and validation. Of course, invoice processing, right? But also not only collecting the invoices, but also the approval workflows for the invoices. If you don't get that right, you have a fraud issue there, and other potential issues on delays and the such. Payments and payment execution, including payment approval workflows, and then of course the post-payment process of corresponding with your suppliers around inquiries, and then of course reconciliation, right, and all your necessary AP reporting. So we look at it end to end, and we think that's the best way to create a process that scales with your business and gets the best ROI for your business in the long term. So that's one perspective.
Thanks very much indeed. Okay, before we go on to look at some of the key findings about what's happening in automation now, just a quick poll for people. So just on that very preliminary discussion, how would you best describe the current state of the automation of processes in your accounts payable department? And you've got only one choice. Would you say there is no automation, that it's partially automated, mostly automated, or do you consider it fully automated? So one choice. How would you best describe the current state of the automation of processes in your accounts payable department? One choice, no automation, partially automated, mostly automated, or fully automated. I'll give you a couple seconds more for everybody to say what they think. Don't think too hard about it, and we'll look at the result in a minute or two, a couple of seconds. Okay, so everybody, 74% partially automated, few, 17% no automation at all, and 9% mostly automated. But having heard the panel already, nobody regards themselves as fully automated in their accounts payable process. Great, that's an interesting snapshot to be going on. So let's look now at that research report that is just published, recently carried out jointly by IFOL with Tipalti, and it offers insights into the latest automation trends, the speed of change. So the key findings, and perhaps Rob, you could kick us off about the lengthy processing times, the information you found out about, and the others will join in with their experience as well.
Yeah, so still, despite a decent amount of respondents in this survey saying they're partially automated, it's actually pretty amazing the amount of time that's still being spent managing invoice processing as well as payments. So the majority, 56% plus, we're spending more than 10 hours a week. So, that's really 40 hours a month, a week, a month. And in addition, 24%, 6 to 10. So, obviously together that's, 80%. So I'd say while there are certainly people that are partially automating, clearly there's quite a ways to go on that front.
Deborah, does that chime with what you're coming across when you're talking to people?
Yeah, yes, it does. Especially, and I kind of focus a lot on the vendor setup process, right? Because that's where you can introduce a lot of fraud, especially in that area as well. So yes, it does chime with what I'm hearing from my audience.
And Rod, any view from you?
I'm not surprised at all by that. I mean, that's exactly what I would have expected to see.
Okay, so no surprise from the first part of research. Let's move on to another point that's been made. And fully automated teams are on the rise. Rob, what's your view of this?
Yeah, I personally thought this was encouraging. While the timeline might be a little further off, it does appear the market has recognized, what the analysts have talked about for years, that it makes sense to automate these processes and do it in a more holistic way. And so it does look like the market's moving towards doing it and making steps toward that path. So I thought this was encouraging in terms of progress in the field.
Is there any more to, oh, sorry, Deborah, you go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to comment here that, companies like Tipalti is making that easier by having a full suite of products instead of having, one tool for this, one tool for that. It makes it harder to get that full automation. And so using the tools or using a tool that has all of the different steps of the process in one really makes it easier. And that's that could be behind what's driving that full automation increase.
Okay. Rod, is there a different view in different places of what fully automated actually means? Should we explore that a little bit more?
Yeah, and I think it comes back to something Deborah said about what you consider to be the automation of the AP process and what's within that. Because if you're talking just about processing invoices and paying them, that's one thing, and a lot more people are perhaps automated in that part of it. But if you look at it from a procure to pay and the entire P2P process, which includes the whole purchasing aspect, procurement, catalogs, vendor master data, right through to the automated interface with your banking partners, that would be a much smaller number. And it would be interesting to understand of the 17% who say they're fully automated, whether that's AP or whether it's P2P. And as Rob said, I think there's a good way to go before we get to probably very few companies that are actually at that stage.
Yeah. Anything to add, Rob, Deborah, before we move on to another point?
The one thing I'll add just to Rod's comment is oftentimes when there's that blurring of the lines between AP and procurement, Oftentimes the beginning of that process or that transition of thinking of it more broadly is PO management, PO matching as the beginning of that procurement thought process, or that spend control thought process. So that would be the only thing I'd kind of add to that insight.
One more thing I would like to add, I hope this means that there is better synergies and collaboration between accounts payable and procurement teams where they are separated, because I know that, in the past can be a big friction, but hopefully this means that, they are working together to get to that fully automated state.
Okay, thanks very much. Let's move on to the next point that's been raised. Managing increases in volume. Rob.
So this definitely wasn't well, surprising in the fact that despite some of the previous data facts on the extent of people who still are not fully automated or automated, who believe they'll cope fairly well, that's still a decent number. But when you take the so-so, not very well, and not well at all numbers, it's quite substantial. And truly, when you think of the ROI of automation, the ROI of automation shows up even more profoundly, not just when you implement it in that first year, but as you grow and as your supplier counts, your invoices count, maybe your business changes and you add a new subsidiary, or you go global, or you have to worry about controls or fraud more than you had to when you were smaller. And so it makes sense that, some folks might feel okay today, but as they grow, they're not quite sure if they're equipped to handle the volumes in the future.
And from what you're saying, it sounds as though it's not an even increase. You need a big increase in volume can mean very different ways of operating that you have to be ready for.
100%.
Okay, Deborah.
Yeah, I don't really have a lot to add to that, although I will say, a big increase in volume, hats off to that 38% that think that felt that they could handle an increase, because I know even at, certain periods of the year, like year end, where you have an increase in volume, you always kind of struggle to get that done and get it done on time. So hats off to those that have that capacity.
Rob, what's your experience?
Yeah, I think recent times were probably the acid test on some of this for a lot of companies through COVID, because it's not so much an increase in invoice volume, but certainly an increase in AP activity. So if you're a company that does physical events, for example, the amount of sort of refunds and things like that you're going to be having to process, as opposed to just processing invoices, is suddenly a huge increase because of the circumstances. And I think your ability to absorb that is a direct factor of how well your automation is working. Because obviously, if you've done it correctly, that scalability is in there. So when the additional volumes come through, it doesn't make an undue difference. If you've not got that automation, of course, it's all manual effort. Yeah, a huge increase in the need for people, and temporary staff for training and everything that goes with it. So I think that's another good reason, I suppose, to look at automation as a necessity, because when something like that happens, when those sorts of events happen, you need to be able to cope.
Okay, thank you. I think we've got one more point from the research that's been done. Oh, the biggest challenges that people see. Right. Rob, again, perhaps you'd lead us off.
Sure. A lot of this kind of alludes to the manual data entry. And that's been fairly consistent over the few years where this research has been done. And I think as people think of manual data entry, sometimes they only think of the invoice processing piece again. But what I'd advocate is think of all the different manual data entry, whether it's going into different bank portals and executing payments, or constantly responding to your suppliers to answer their supplier inquiry questions, or dealing with payment errors or the such like that. So, but that was my main takeaway from looking at this.
Okay, Deborah, what would you add to that, if anything?
Yeah, so I wasn't surprised at all about the invoice exceptions causing processing delays to take too long, right? So if you have invoices coming in that don't, three-way match or some reason don't fit, and I think sometimes, we put too much pressure on what's supposed to happen at that invoice stage. Again, I refer to vendor processing, right? We're not supposed to take that invoice and, process bank changes or other types of changes. Those should be at that point coming in and processing solely as an invoice. So I wasn't surprised at all about the invoice exceptions, and definitely not surprised about the manual data entry that's involved in it.
Okay. And Rod?
I think it's probably worth saying as well that in terms of the technology, that some of these issues should be easily resolvable now, because the technology has moved on so much in the last sort of 5 years or so. I mean, one of the issues that always used to have with manual automatic processing of invoices was it took a huge amount of configuration, and you ought to the rules in for different suppliers, the different layouts of invoices and so forth. But with the prevalence of sort of machine learning engines underpinning the technology, it will learn as you go along. So I think increasingly I would expect to see some of these percentages move quite significantly, because the technology solves a lot of these issues, whereas previously it was much more labor intensive to actually set the technology up. Now I'm sure Rob could talk about that much more within Tipalti, but it is significantly easier, and the interface between other technologies with your ERP are also significantly easier than they used to be.
So it's all being the technology is being proved, and people are gradually getting there. Okay,
yeah.
let's move on from those points in the research. The trends are showing that there is some movement. Rod has just said he expects it to be quicker going forward. But how do people recognize when they should scale up? Can we talk a little bit about that? What would you be seeing? What would you need to do? Don't know who'd like to kick off on this. Maybe Rod. Would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I think it sort of comes back to something I said right at the start. I think recognizing when to scale up, it kind of happens in two reasons, really. I think one, it's either that it becomes a necessity because the volumes and the amount of time you're spending on on manual activity and not hitting the targets and KPIs that you've set yourself, you get to the stage where it's the only solution to be able to get to where you want to get to. Secondly, it also depends very much on the company. Some companies will have a digital transformation roadmap for not just for AP but for the entire company. And obviously AP often forms the first part of that. So it's a recognition and it's part of a wider program. But I would say that unless you're in a bubble where things don't change very much and it's the same year in year out, it will become self-evident as to when you need to scale. And
okay,
it should be something that's, if it's not on your agenda now, it ought to be.
Okay, Deborah.
Yeah, and talking from the process side, if you're still doing manual processing, and I'll make talk about a scenario where, let's say you're partially automated, and in some cases that can mean maybe you didn't automate, your entire vendor or supplier type, right, or population. Maybe you automated only a portion of them, U.S. versus non-U.S. or specific supplier type and not all supplier types. So when you're still getting calls from suppliers asking about payment status from that population you didn't include in the rollout, you've got a staff for that. If you still are, getting vendor supporting documentation via email for vendor onboarding, there's a huge risk. I talked before, there's a huge risk of fraud in that activity. That definitely needs to be automated. When you're still handling payment processing, I know that was one of the questions in the report, and that takes a lot of time, especially when you still have a lot of check payments, giving that over to or outsourcing that to a payment provider can put the onus on that provider to, convert those check payments to credit card payments or commercial card payments so that you can get a rebate. So you're not only saving time, but you're also providing some points of revenue there as well. So anytime you're still spending that manual processing time on answering phones, processing payments, and then manually processing what could be fraudulent data from or information from vendors via email, I think those are all signs that you definitely need to automate to scale up, especially if you have some automation, but you haven't included your entire supplier population in that.
Thanks, Deborah. Rob?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is just in addition to those triggers, looking for signs of growth in your business. So, whether it's, different investment rounds or anticipated hiring, growth plans in the business, globalization plans, maybe new subsidiaries in the company, all those are going to add complexity to your operation. Similarly, if you are getting to some of those triggers that Deborah mentioned, those pains, if that's causing you to think about hiring more AP people, it's a good sign to kind of consider of, should you actually first look at streamlining, automating the processes, and then you can make the right determination of which finance employee or is the right person to hire next or across the business. So looking for those kind of signs and anticipating the growth, the future growth of the business, not only business growth, but also, invoice and other processes that could kind of cause the current process to break even further than they are today.
Okay, thanks very much. Now, I'm sure what everybody wants, what we're calling our automation roadmap, pointers in the right direction, where to go, where to start, what to be looking at, the considerations and challenges. Who would like to start us off with this one?
I can start on that one.
Thank you, Deborah.
I'll say, the biggest thing I would make sure that those that are looking at automating or moving towards full automation is do not forget your internal team members. Reach out to them early, reach out to them often. Keep them updated, keep them in the loop, because they are the ones, especially for non-PO purchases, they are the ones that have the relationship with the vendor that the vendor, will work with or may go to, say, what the heck is this new tool, right? And so the internal team member will definitely not shy away from expressing their opinion about that new automation tool. So make that opinion positive. If you have large groups, assign one person from that group to be included in the testing, and maybe even have that person be in that trainer role. It will be more palatable coming from one of their own. And so again, just make sure that you include the internal team members that will be affected by the new automation.
Okay, thank you. Rob, what would you say were the important points on this roadmap to automation?
Sure. Was that Rod or Rob?
Rob, let's go with Rob. No, it was Rob.
Okay, Rob with a B. I think actually building on Deborah's point, as you're getting input from your teammates, actually mapping out the current processes and where the pains are in the current processes, as well as trying to anticipate how those processes may change in the future. It's a great way to get input and buy-in along the way. The other thing, I'd just look at what those future processes are, and then try and map what are the main pain points you're solving for there. I think probably we can touch on maybe a little later, what to look for, when you're assessing the vendors. But I think it starts with mapping out current and future processes, and then looking for the right technology to address those.
Rod, what will your points be?
I think putting my my accountant hat on, inevitably, somebody in the business is going to hold the purse strings, and it will need some investment to do this. And so there needs to be a financial business case to underpin it. So we can't ignore that's going to be the case. The good news is, I think increasingly these sorts of technologies are becoming much more affordable as time goes on. That's the good news. But I think you need to give an awful lot of thought to what success looks like for your business and how you measure it. So in terms of your benefits that you expect to get out of it, you need to be able to try and put some sort of value on that, but try and think wider than just the binary sort of, it's going to be, 2 or 3 fewer people or whatever, the traditional measures are. The benefits that you get from it will be much wider reaching. And I know we'll talk about that in a bit more detail, but try and think about, if you're creating capacity for other people to do, something more useful, what's the value of that thing they're going to do? And that's the sort of thing you need to include in the business case. So you might need to be one step removed from the immediate impact to actually have the compelling case as to why you need the investment. And then just building on from things that Rob and Deborah have already said, I think it's important to think about the skills audit within your team. So you will need new skills to do this inevitably, but you may well have people that have already got that experience. You may not. So understand what it is that you need, where you need help when you pick your partner. Whether it's a Tipalti or another firm of a similar nature, and make sure that you're building skills transfer as part of that, because you want to be in partnership with your partners, but you don't want to be dependent. So you do need to make sure that you're building in time to make sure you're skilling up your teams as to get the benefit of the expertise that you're buying in.
Okay. Something I always ask before we go on to the outcomes and the benefits of automation, just a quick question, might be a very simple answer. In the scale of things, because I know we have all sorts of different managers with us, does the scale of the operation, the scale of the firm, the size of the business, does that affect what you would suggest they do? Rob, Rob Israch, what would you say?
Yeah, I actually think it does. If you have less than 100 invoices a month, maybe less than 100 payments a month, you may not have the same challenges as if you're at 500 or 1,000 invoice a month, or maybe if you have other complexities, global, or you're getting mature and need to worry about fraud processes and control processes, spend controls. So the invoice volume, payments volume, and maybe the nature, the makeup of those payments, are there multiple methods? Are they single country or multi-country? Those are good triggers to look at in terms of whether you need automation and the extent of automation that you need. Deborah,
anything to add to that point?
So I do think, in addition to that, you also need to look at whether you have a segregation of duties issues. Lots of times we have those smaller companies, they have smaller staff to perform those processes, and they can't separate, who creates a vendor, who processes or posts an invoice, and who generates that payment. So keep that in mind as you're deciding on whether to scale up or to look for tools that you can solve those problems with automation versus with the manual compensatory controls of management review of everything. So make sure you take that segregation of duties into consideration as well.
Thank you. Anything briefly, Rod, that you would want to add?
Not really, I totally agree. I mean, I think, so the principles are similar, irrespective of the size of the business, about getting your processes right and getting everything in place before you automate. The extent to which you automate and the sort of tools that you're going to choose will inevitably be a factor. The size and complexity of business will be a factor in that decision. So yeah, it does matter, but the underlying principles are the same.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Right, briefly, a couple of minutes. I think you've all touched on many areas of this, but briefly, each person, the outcome and benefits of automation, the ones you'd put top of your list. Deborah, let's start with you again.
I would just say, upskilling your staff. So I know that upskilling and also retaining that staff. I know we talked earlier about, this current generation that's just come into the workforce. They're looking for that technology. They're looking to work with companies that have that technology. And so exposing the team to technology can really upskill them, as well as maybe adding them to, from the manual invoice processing to more value-added tasks that they can be assigned to. And so I think that's a huge piece or a huge part of attracting staff and retaining staff and just adding more value-added tasks to the accounts payable or P2P function.
Okay, Rob Israch.
Yeah, I totally agree on that, of course. And then to Rod's earlier comment, of course, headcount, future headcount avoidance in that function is part of it, of the equation. I think there's a bunch of softer elements that are as important. It's been hit on in various ways, but fraud and compliance controls and best practices are really important. Cost controls, increasingly important. Things like PO matching, PO management, and ways to avoid waste in the function should be part of that ROI equation. The other piece that's often overlooked is usually getting acceleration in your financial close, your monthly close processes when you do this right. And, you know, as any CFO or finance director knows, if you accelerate your financial close by something substantial, 20% cycle time, that matters to the business, not only to finance, but the whole business in terms of speed and accuracy of decision making. So there's outcomes like that that are often actually underweighted in the ROI equation of a project like this. Okay.
Rod, in your experience, what's your view?
Yeah, I mean, totally agree with everything that's been said so far. Controls, I think, is worth emphasising as we head into a UK SOX environment increasingly. Those controls are going to be right at the forefront of most CFOs' minds to make sure that they've actually, auditable and got all the controls in place, and this definitely helps with it. I think the other thing that's worth thinking about as well, particularly in the current climate, is we talk often in terms of automation as something to help the customer journey, which it certainly does. But I think also when we're talking about AP, we need to think about the supply chain and actually sort of shoring up the supply chain, which is a hot topic for most companies at the moment. And I know a lot of companies having problems with that. So what you don't want is an AP process that's actually not paying people on time, giving you lots of problems, causing all sorts of issues for your suppliers, because the risk then of actually sort of interrupting that supply chain increases. And so again, it's the sort of hidden benefits, I think, sometimes that you don't always see, that actually are sometimes the compelling reason for actually doing it.
I'll just add actually to what Rod just said, but the pay on time rules that are coming down the pike also have to be noted, and it goes right to the supply chain issues Rod just mentioned.
Yeah. Okay, got a couple of questions, and we're heading down towards the end and our final poll, but a couple of comments, questions here. So Maisie says, I'm sorry if I missed it, but our system allows us to enter recurring invoices. However, our concern is that the system does generate accurate information. Example, invoice numbers don't align. What are your thoughts? Is that not important? Who wants to address that? Any comments on that?
I think the one thing Rod had mentioned, machine learning a little earlier, with the right technology, it should be able to find patterns like that. Even if it gets it wrong the first time, if it then is addressed within the software by the staff, the system should be able to learn that, and in the future that those types of errors should reduce over the course of time. So so it can help with those types of use cases.
Okay. And what does the panel think about check payment? How do you handle check payment? Encourage people not to, I guess.
Yeah, as much as possible. Yeah, I mean, it is an issue, and I think particularly for those companies that are global, checks are still quite prevalent in the States. For example, certainly compared to the UK. I know most companies are trying to move people away to it and obviously get people onto electronic payment methods. But I think it's more, one of the big issues about check payments is actually the relationship with the banking partners and making sure that you've got something in place that enables you to do them in a speedy, simple way. I've seen examples of this where checks can be bouncing around the business for months at a time, and arcane ways of actually sort of approving them. So try and get a banking partner that allows you to do things like scanning them, for example.
Okay.
Process. I mean, obviously you need all the internal process to make sure that they're allocated to the right places, to the right customers, and matched and so forth, which you do through your AP software. But banking side at the back end, I think, is equally important when you're looking.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so just one comment, adding to what Deborah says, increased automation will change the profile of the AP function from that of an admin back office organization to a better partner to the business by way of performing more value added work. I think that summed up quite a bit of what you said. We have one final poll before we go. Let's put that up, and if people could respond to it quite quickly. Do we have our final poll? Yes. Are you planning on automating your accounts payable processes? Single choice, already automated. Yes, planned within the next 12 months. Yes, but it isn't a priority. Or no. And this will be a thing to finish on and food for thought for everybody joining us and the panel. So planning on automating your accounts payable processes, already automated. Yes, planned within the next 12 months. Yes, but it isn't a priority. Or no. Okay, so plenty planning going on for the next 12 months. So that's encouraging for every, yeah, thumbs up there, Deborah, well done. So already automated 13%, planned within the next 12 months 67%, yes, but it isn't a priority 21%, and everybody is pretty keen to do something. So thanks very much for responding to that poll, and thanks for the questions and comments that we've had. And of course, thanks to our panel of experts, Deborah Richardson, Rob Israch from Tipalti, and Rod Chadwick. And thanks to you for joining us. For more information on membership and courses, please head to the IFOL website. And this webinar will be available on demand on the IFOL website from tomorrow. Let everybody know about it, share it with anybody who might find it interesting. We'll send a link to top suggestions and of course a PDF best practice guide. So for today, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.